This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students, and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Tanisha M. Jackson, who teaches in the Department of African American Studies at Syracuse University, where she is also executive director of the Community Folk Arts Center. Her research focuses on the place of community art practice in education and liberation struggle. Along with a number of scholarly essays and curated exhibitions, she is the author of Black Women's Art Ecosystems, Sites of Wellness and Self-Care from 2025, which was awarded the Anna Julia Cooper and CLR James Award for Outstanding Publication in Africana Studies from the National Council for Black Studies. She recently received a National Endowment for the Arts grant for the Community Folk Arts Center's inaugural Artist in Residency program, and she is founder and host of the film series Black Arts Speak. In this conversation, we discuss the place of art in the field of Black studies, how art and community expand our sense of liberation work, and how the Black Studies classroom links the personal, the communal, and the aesthetic. Good morning, Tanisha. How are you?
Good morning, John. I'm doing well.
I'm really excited about this episode and have this conversation with you. Been looking forward to this. Recording this is my last week of teaching for the semester, so I need these kinds of respites from the madness of the last week.
Right.
Lots of things make me really excited about this conversation. I think you're in a Black Studies department, you have a master's degree in African American Studies, these sorts of things, but also the kind of community work you do in the arts, in addition to being at a university and a program. I think this combination of things is so much exactly what the field of Black Studies has always been about. So I'm really extra looking forward to that. And I love having people who work in the arts on the podcast. We need more of that representation. So that's a long way of saying welcome to the Black Studies Podcast, and I really look forward to chatting.
Well, thank you. And I agree. And I'm excited to talk to you too. And thank you for recognizing that we need more of the arts in the discipline. And I feel like that's something that I contribute to through both my scholarship and teaching and really public facing work.
I love that. Yeah, I really look forward to hearing more about it. We'll obviously have a chance to talk about how you understand the field of Black studies, sort of what that portrait is for you, and about your research and work. But I wanted to start really with the more personal question and just ask you, what is it that drew you to Black studies? What drew you to the study of Black life? And what keeps you connected to this kind of work?
Right. So I appreciate the question. So yeah, my origin story starts at age 4 or was it 5? Believe it or not.
I like that.
Yeah. So, and I've had time to think about this, because I connected to some of my teaching, but I can remember being actually this was preschool, so age 4, being in preschool, and for Black History Month, we had to, as students, present, a historical Black figure. And I remember my mother sitting me down in our kitchen and going over a passage from Frederick Douglass' slave narrative, of all things. And I don't know why she selected it.
Preschool.
But this is right. Both my parents are very ambitious, very, they met in college. And so, and this has kind of, I've been shaped by this. It's like to kind of do above and beyond in many respects, expectations of myself. And so, or at least that's how I interpret it. But I was sitting at our kitchen table and going over this passage, so when I presented it to my class, it was like, oh, wow, because most people say, some students would say, oh, I don't know, Martin Luther King had a dream, something simple like that. And yet I committed to memory this passage. And I remember being interested in like Black history, excited about how people recognize, me being smart and so connecting um, that experience to a long trajectory of just being interested in the life of and history of Black people, Black political movements has been the through line of my work from, I would say, preschool to, now, in ways in which there's just turning points in my life where um, it has just always been something that I've either explored formally through school or informally.
So how did I'm interested then how that's of the preschool Frederick Douglass is just I mean, it's amazing. I'm thinking about, really loved my kids' preschool, but, they coulda used a Frederick Douglass day. Um, I mean, how did that sort of sensibility follow you through education and, whether it's K through 12 or into college and graduate school? Because obviously, master's in African American studies, but did you feel like that was sort of this flash and sort of waited until the sort of master's degree where you got to fulfill those sorts of insights, or has this always been as sort of the study of Black life and the sort of Black studies, sensibility sort of always been a part of your educational experience?
It's always been a part of my educational experience. I can remember being in high school and I was in the Upward Bound program at Ohio State, and there was a Black Studies class. And I think that was probably my first introduction to Black Studies in ways in which we had this professor, and she just made it so exciting and just so, it was history I had never been taught up to that point. And so from there, I remember saying, "Oh, I really enjoy studying this," and we have like projects and so but from there, I didn't make the connection of majoring in Black studies until the master, so that my first degree is in English and at Ohio State University, but I had a concentration in African American literature, right? And so I've always, and I, with all my degrees, the focus has always been on Black people, Black stories,
Mhm,
Black
mhm,
lives. And then I just actively pursued it at the master's level.
mhm, mhm,
And then even within my doctoral studies in art education, um, I'm not a traditional art educator. So I'm not someone with K through 12 experience, at least but not at that point when I was matriculating through the doctoral program. But I was focused on Black visual culture and art and the representation
mhm.
of Black life in those spaces so that the continuity of Black studies has always been there within my educational attainment.
I like that. That has really describes so much of the dimensionality of encountering Black studies and Black life in these different places. Because English, African American studies, and education studies are
Mhm.
very different. But as you said, you were not traditional, you know, in terms of English or education, precisely because of the sort of African American studies sort
Right.
of dimension. I don't even know, sort of critical frame. Something I like that.
Right, and I wanna add one other thing because, I often tell people that when I was at Ohio State and 3 of my 4 degrees, come from Ohio State, so undergrad, master's, and PhD, and I have, like, an MBA from the University of Toledo, but while I was at The Ohio State University and specifically during my undergraduate years, I was nurtured in a, or at a, Black Cultural Center, the Frank W. Held Jr. Black Cultural Center, and I
Mhm,
didn't know
mhm.
then, but it has significantly influenced the work that I do now as the executive director of the Community Folk Arts Center, so that for 4 years, I was a work study student, I was an assistant curator, I was involved in programming for the Frank W. Held Jr. Black Cultural Center, and so it added a lot of things. It showed me the practice of Black studies at
Mhm.
a very early age, or I, you know, as an undergrad, I should say. And then also, it really gave me, I say, a HBCU experience at a PWI,
Mhm, mhm.
but in ways that I would return um, back to Black cultural spaces and centers later professionally, and so I count that as part of my education in Black studies as
I
well.
like that. Yeah, I love that. I think those, and it's come out in a number of these conversations, how those second spaces end up not just being sort of areas of sort of safety, comfort, and retreat, but as you said, of like real education, learning, and understanding, and touchstone. As you said, you keep coming back to it. I love that. I will say that my collaborator Ashley is Michigan State undergrad and grad, so all this talk about Ohio State's probably going to get her to tune down this episode. But
Well, it could be worse. She could come from that school up north, but
I think there's a shared loathing there, but still,
I'm
I
sure.
don't know if anybody would admit it in the state of Michigan, having lived there myself for a little while.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
but let
I
me
have a lot of
ask.
friends at MSU, so a lot of
Okay,
colleagues. Mm.
okay, so maybe there's a piece that can be brokered
There could
rhetorically.
be, there could be.
So let me ask you about your how you think about the field of Black studies, and I always like to ask this question in the context of its origins, which had a tension built into it, right? There was the demand by students that there be a place at universities to study Black life, right? That disciplines weren't doing this sort of thing in any kind of adequate way. And Black studies departments were going to be those places and have been those places where the intellectual tradition has lived and grown and been appreciated and built. But at that same time, of course, that same moment was the radicalization of Black liberation struggle, where distinctions between community and campus, between classrooms and political mobilization, between ideas and activism had really kind of been collapsed, or certainly there was an effort to collapse them in this moment of founding Black studies. And I think we inherit that in terms of the political dimension, kind of political prescriptive dimension of Black studies, a commitment to a certain kind of liberatory politics. And so I think there's that tension. I never want to call it a contradiction, but kind of tension in at the heart of Black studies between political commitment and intellectual life. And
Mhm.
sort of staging it that way, I wanted to ask you, what is a portrait of Black studies for you? How do you imagine it, and how does it orient you?
Yes. So for me, Black studies has always been a political and intellectual project. And I don't think those things should be separated. So that's the first point that I want to make. It it comes out of activism, out of demand, out of struggle, and I think it has to stay accountable to that. At the same time, it's built this incredibly rich intellectual tradition that has reshaped how we think about culture, history, and power. So the goal isn't to choose between political impact and intellectual work, it's to hold them together. And I see Black studies as a space, or I should say that Black studies should produce knowledge that matters and that moves and that connects to real communities and real lives.
Mhm.
And so, and thinking about, maybe the tension between like political and an intellectual project, I see them as inextricably intertwined.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I like that inextricably intertwined, but also that, that I think you used the word. I always wish I could rewind or if I remembered it, but like the being accountable to,
Mhm.
right? In that sense of intellectual and political life being accountable to one another, um, which I think actually is an interesting sort of transition to this other question I had, which was really to ask you about your own research in relation to the field of Black studies. Your work is interested in both thinking about and producing film, art, visual cultural studies, as you said, and there's so much that I think for the field of Black studies in that, but also is already at the heart of the origins of the field, right? And the origins of Black Atlantic life.
Mhm.
And so I'm interested how you think that the kind of work that you do and the kind of interests you have fit into the history of the field of Black studies, but also how you think it pushes new horizons or pushes boundaries in some way.
Right. So my work is really grounded in the foundations of Black studies, especially its interdisciplinary nature and its attention to culture. And and I have a lot of fun doing it too. I'm good. When I think about
Mhm.
how I approach Black studies. Um, but I'm also trying to push the field a bit, especially in how we think about visual culture, and I'm less interested in just what images mean and more interested in what makes them possible.
Hmm.
So, what are the systems, the relationships, and the labor behind them? Um, and I'm really invested in bringing wellness and care into those conversations as well. And that's connected to, my book, Black Women's Art Ecosystem Sites of Wellness and Self Care. And it's in that body of work that Black women artists in particular are doing this work every day, creating space, sustaining themselves, supporting each other, and I think that's central to Black studies, even if we haven't, always named it in that way, and so I'm always interested in how visual culture, art, so I will say maybe to simplify it, visual and expressive arts are are used as a form of communicating um, other disparate fields
Mhm.
and topics. And so currently, I've been thinking about wellness and care. I've been thinking about rest and building and what archives we have that help us to understand how that really contributes to like Black life and Black studies.
Can I ask you about the use of that word ecosystem? That was really interesting to me. Because I think like people tend to say, use words like community to talk about connections or relationships but ecosystem is such an interesting term and no one titles a book. I mean, it's hard to write books, so we got to get we got to get the words on the cover that we want. How does ecosystem factor into that? I'm really interested to hear.
So long ago, I was pre-med, like seriously pre-med. And
Uh,
so I have a lot of biology classes under my belt and chemistry. That's the first thing. And so
by the way, sorry to interrupt you, but I have to say, I think I've spent, 25 years as Black Studies professor. I would say probably half of the Black Studies majors I've worked with have previously been pre-med. I don't know what it is. There's pre-med, well, I have lots of speculation, but pre-med and then ending up in Black Studies and then the parents being disappointed, but the students flourishing and all that.
listen,
So yeah.
it's a sore topic with for my mom, I'll say that much. My dad, not so much. He wanted me to be a lawyer. I blame the Cosby Show. I grew up in
Oh,
an era where
interesting.
seriously, and then I'll answer your question, but I I grew up during a time when, I mean, that was kind of like, the metrics of success. You'd be a
Mhm.
lawyer like Claire, you'd be a doctor like Cliff, that sort of thing, and so I told my mom at 5 I wanted to be a doctor and a medical doctor, and she ran with it, and and I started taking classes, and I didn't do too bad, but then I was just like, "This is not me." Like, I don't enjoy labs, right?
Mhm.
But I'm informed by my understanding of ecosystems and how, y y how, maybe, conceptually or metaphorically, there's kind of like we all live in ecosystems there's micro, macro, those sorts of things, and so when I started to look at artists and for this project, I was looking at Black women artists, but it's not exclusive to Black women.
Mhm.
That there's an art ecosystem that takes place, and then when I was reflecting. I was interviewing these women artists who I some of them knew each other by like 2 or 3 degrees of separation. Um, I started to make the connection that, within this community of Black women artists, I mean, there's a larger ecosystem of the arts, like an art ecosystem, but
Hmm.
within a community of Black women artists, there is a conversation taking place, and there's movement, and there's, abiotic, factors. So if you think about the institutions of art and museums and galleries that impact and inform their work, and then there's like, working directly within community and people in ways in which it just clicked for me that these Black women artists are operating and having conversations with each other and within their respective communities, in ways that help them to facilitate care for themselves and also people within their respective communities. And so I was able to think about the actual structure of, a conventional, maybe biological ecosystem, like
Hmm.
sun, wind, trees, animals, people, and then connect that to artists, um, gallerists, galleries, museums, and everything in between that helps to build this community of artists and how they really function in a very organic way.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. I had to ask because, first of all, I was just struck by it, but also thinking back to an early episode on the Black Studies podcast with Stephanie Sparling Williams, where she was talking about her own sense of what curatorial work is as creating a space in which it's possible. I remember, my students are sick of hearing this phrase because I use it all the time now. She said it's a possibility of breathing black air. And so I was really interested when you said, ecosystem in this title, working with arts, like ecosystems, air, the sense of care and wellness and all of these things.
Right.
Um,
Well, if
yeah.
we think about the air and the oxygen, it helps to move cyclically, right? The ecosystem, like, so we need that. We need these elements to connect. And there's an energy there that brings all of these different factors, and players within the ecosystem together. And that makes sense to me. And I myself am a curator. And so I get to insert myself into the ecosystem in that way outside of creating my own art. But it's really through curation that I'm able to I guess, really curate or cultivate a conversations around different topics that brings what I do back to Black studies.
Hmm.
And but
Hmm.
then also to like it's one of its tenets of being connected to like the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that. Thank you. Sort of, I think developing this, I want to hear you also talk a little bit about your educational background, right?
Mm.
That your PhD is in an education department, as you said, arts education, which I mean, I want to say, I want to say it's like a disciplinary education because education is a discipline, but I also know it's multiple disciplines, sort of folded in, traditional disciplines folded in together. And your master's degree was in African American studies, which is not a traditional discipline, right?
Mhm.
And then I guess we could go back to your undergraduate, a traditional discipline of English. And so I'm interested in how this movement in and out of disciplinary work into multidisciplinary work, how you think that shaped both how you conceive and do research, but also how you practice a classroom.
Oh, wow. So moving between African American studies and art education has been really important for me. Um, it's through art education that I've believe that I've really shaped my pedagogical, approach to teaching Black studies. Um, and art education taught me how to think about audience and engagement. So how people actually experience knowledge, African American studies, though, grounded me in the history and politics and theory that
Mhm.
I value, that I really, really, truly it's like my part of my intrinsic values, right? And so now being in an African American studies department and directing a, African Diaspora Arts Center, I get to bring those things together. My teaching reflects that, and I use film and visual culture not just as content, but as a tool for thinking. And so when I'm in class, I mean, in ways that make sense, I'm able to, create a curriculum that is in very conventional ways of thinking. I'm teaching Black studies, but at the Community Folk Arts Center, um, it's there that I'm able to, I would say, really can make those connections in ways that, have a engage a much broader audience. Think about the pedagogically, um, how Black studies may, transform, in community spaces or might be different in comparison to, like, the classroom.
Mhm.
And really, um, both those educational experiences have helped me to be able to serve in that role so that Black studies is, I would say, more, much more accessible
Mhm.
for people who are not in the college classroom, so that through my teaching and through my public scholarship, there's ways in which I'm integrating it in an exhibition, in a film series, where I'm showing films and we're having like discussions and talk back, and the people that I invite into the space in art making, which sometimes people don't always make that connection of Black studies and art making. In maybe Black art history, yes, or, Black studies course that focuses on, the history of art, because there's a distinction there as well. But in actual, like, doing, making, seeing, and community engagement,
Mhm.
it's extended, and a lot of that, training, is connected to my art education background.
Do the undergraduates in your classroom work at all with the community arts work, or are these sort of very separate, sort of endeavors for you? Because I'm interested in how the classroom is transformed for them by, like, moving between those spaces if they do, which I assume that they do.
Yeah. Oh, I love this question, and you can see I'm excited.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I wish we had video because you were like, "Yes, I'm
Oh,
glad you asked."
I listen,
I'm
I
glad I asked.
intentionally teach all of my classes at the Community Folk Arts Center.
Oh, you host them there, I love that.
So my students have to meet me there for their class. So when I'm teaching art of the Black world, they're in the Black Box Theater. And I start off with the introduction of the space, the importance of that space. It was founded in 1972 during the Black Arts Movement. And so it's very much a 20th century organization. It's 54 years old that still has relevance and ties to the community. And then from there, part of the curriculum is for them to engage with the artists that are exhibiting there, to engage with the exhibitions, we have African drumming and dancing. And then we have a lot of community programs and events and as well as classes. The same thing for my Black film course that I teach. I teach a course, titled Contemporary Black Film. And so they are, watching films. Lately, I've been having them organize a film festival
Hmm.
so that what they have learned gets applied, and then we show these films to the community. And so I streamline my work, as the executive director slash curator of the Community Folk Arts Center with my teaching. And
Mhm.
in many ways, I have to do that because I really have 2 full-time jobs. So,
Yeah,
it
I was wondering if that was just in terms of sheer efficiency of 2 jobs.
it's efficiency, and then it's also the intentionality of them experiencing the way I see Black studies should be experienced
Mhm.
as a student and as a practitioner in the field.
I love that. I mean, I think students experiencing education outside of a formal classroom is it always has a huge effect on it, and they really want it. I mean, I'm not to put, I'm sure you've had a wide range of experiences that way, but I found generally that students just crave like alternative spaces for doing what they're doing in the classroom. So I love that you're able to not only have that alternative space, but it to be absolutely like the stage of everything you're doing.
It's so interesting because when I first started out, post my doctoral studies, so PhD, I felt like a lot of people in the academy maybe didn't know what to do with me. And what I mean by that is, if you look at, my degrees, my areas of study, it doesn't necessarily read clear like, oh, she's a historian or, she's, a lit person or, because there's these
Yeah.
different areas. And for me, it always makes sense, especially seeing the discipline as, interdisciplinary, some might even say multidisciplinary. So in ways in which I landed in a, opportunity where I was able to merge all of those areas, into the teaching and the administrative aspect of my work, and so it makes complete sense to me now, and, from when I first started, full-time professionally in the field, I feel like people are catching up
Mhm.
in how they see, colleagues' contributions if it doesn't necessarily translate directly into one particular, discipline or area of study, and I think that's what really enriches, Black studies and
Yeah.
brings it back to, its intended purpose.
It's funny because as you were saying, people don't know how to have not always known how to make sense of what you do, and I was like, "It makes sense in Black studies," and then you came right back to that, you know?
Yeah,
So
well,
it's important to have a home for because it's not eclectic interests, it's Black studies interests, and
mhm,
have a place that not only recognizes that, but is able to I'm glad it's able to facilitate that, to actually have a center as well as a scholarly academic position, and
mhm,
work. Yeah.
right, yeah, I agree.
So, 2 more questions for you. The first one, thinking about the history of Black studies, I'm interested what you think that Black studies has done well, and what do you think has not done particularly well?
Hmm. So Black Studies has done an incredible job transforming the academy. I mean, that goes without saying. It's changed like what we teach, how we teach, and what counts as knowledge. Um, it's also stayed connected to community in really important ways. But there are still challenges, and we see that now more than ever, especially around resources and institutional support. And programs are often stretched thin. There's this national trend that I think reflects that. And I think we can do more to fully recognize creative practice as scholarship, of course, and artists have always been central to Black studies, but institutions don't always treat that work as equally rigorous or valuable.
Mhm.
So I think that's maybe a critique on my end, and, I'm reminded also, in you asking this question, that very early on in the current political climate, I feel that, Black studies as a discipline, um, allow for other people outside of the discipline to define what Black studies is in ways where we've been reactive.
Yeah.
And so when I think about that, I'm talking about, for example, people saying, "Oh, it's DEI," when in fact Black studies is a discipline. So that to be proactive and get the messaging, us coming together and being clear, and within Black studies, there's, people have different ideas, but there are core care. there's a core identity of Black studies that we should all be rallying around and communicating to people so that we don't get defined by others. And I'm reminded by Audre Lorde's quote where she says, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive."
Mm,
And I believe that we become, as a discipline, Black studies is vulnerable to that when the
yeah.
political messaging is saying that we're something that we're not. And then from there, policies get created around it.
Absolutely. No, that's really well put. Thank you for that. I mean, there's lots in this podcast has been fantastic. That alone, this last little bit makes all of this more than worth it because I really like that way of thinking about it. This is the way we get eaten alive.
Mhm.
You know, it's interesting to me. I mean, I know that when Ashley and I started this podcast project, I mean, we just thought it'd be like a dozen or two of our friends if we had that many friends. Um, and now yours will be like episode like 260, 261, something. And, what I hope, I mean, initially we were like, let's sort of honor the 50th anniversary, sort of post 50th anniversary, because the 50th anniversary was during COVID. We were like, let's sort of do some work on that sort of memorialization and sort of looking forward. But I think the way the timing of the podcast has put it in this particular moment, I'm like, well, I hope we're like one among many, many, many resources to say, look, this is a very serious field and it has lots of ways of defining itself. And if you don't know what that definition is, you haven't done the work, so that we aren't eaten alive, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
But I'm also really struck by, as you say, sort of honoring, valuing, just even in terms of tenure promotion, certainly in terms of hiring, creative work.
Mhm.
And, again, I like whenever possible to refer intra podcast to other episodes. Another early episode was with Elena Guzman, who's at Indiana University, and she was an anthropologist by training, but in the African American Studies department there. And she made a film, and so she was talking about sort of how does making a film fit into a tenured promotion to professional side of things. And one of the things we talked about, and it's really been on my mind a lot since then, is the very things we teach in the classroom, the very things that make it possible for us to have rich curricula. Like, what does it mean if we're not tendering and promoting people who are doing that kind of work? I mean, we value it to put it on a syllabus. I consider putting it on something on a syllabus to be very high value. I mean, I'm judging this to be the most important thing you could learn this semester, right?
Yeah.
But then when it comes to tenure promotion, this pause and this hesitation or the confusion, I'm just glad. All that's to say, I know I'm going on, but I'm happy to hear that on this podcast again because I think it's something we really need to think about as a discipline.
Absolutely. I mean, as someone who I have a short film series called Black Art Speak. And so, I mean, it's definitely just, one aspect of, my scholarship, but that is knowledge production. That is content creation, but that is truly knowledge production when you think
Mm,
about um, what it takes to create a film, what it takes to curate an exhibition, and the research behind it, and the curating of conversations of people, other scholarship that interconnects with those forms of I would say, knowledge production so that if we really, I think in order for the organization to not just sustain itself, but to expand and grow, that we need to consider those areas and count them as part of scholarship
mhm.
in ways that not only help and support, the educator or professor who is or the artist who is creating this knowledge production, but then also it better serves our students
Yeah.
because students learn in in multimodal ways.
Mm,
And so not every student is going to read your book or article. I mean, yes, if they're in our class and we make them accountable to do so, but if you have a student who is a creative and the way in which they're able to understand the work and to communicate that their comprehension of that is through the production of a film, is through a podcast, is through, these other uh, these other forms of knowledge production, then we are in fact reaching those students, and then also we are connecting their interests in ways that I believe will help build and expand the discipline. And
Mhm.
so, 50 plus years, Black studies has been a discipline. We have people with PhDs in the field in ways that, it's maturing. It has matured as a discipline. And yet, going back to our previous conversation of having to fight for um, our space, relevancy, survival, I believe that we have to really think about what that might look like for the next 50 years,
Yeah.
especially since the world has evolved with technology, with AI, with the other things that weren't considered when the discipline was first founded.
Mhm. I have another question for you, but that would be an amazing place to end, I have to say. And maybe this is, maybe you've already kind of given an answer to this, but last question I had for you, which is, so thinking in a Black Studies context, what's the question you would want us to all be asking, or the issue you would want us to all be thinking about?
Just one question?
I think maybe 3 or 4 people out of 260 have given one. So,
Okay.
most people are like, "I have a few."
Yeah. So right now, I think we need to be asking, like, what does it mean to build sustainable Black institutions? And this
Mhm.
connects to my next project. Um, but so, what does it mean to build sustainable Black institutions, not just survive, but actually thrive? I'm thinking about connecting Black studies departments with Black cultural institutions. The both of them sprung up together, and getting and kind of reclaiming those spaces as part of the curricula that we have. I believe are important for both of those spaces to survive.
Absolutely.
And how do we center wellness and care and rest? Of course, that's part of, my current scholarship, but not as luxuries, but as necessary.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of emotional labor that takes place beyond the classroom when you're a Black Studies scholar. Um, so those are two questions that come to mind, as well as how do we stay accountable to the communities that shape this field? We
Yeah.
can't forget the communities. We can't forget the community. We have to connect. We have to be present. There has to be outreach. That is at the core of how I see Black studies. And so from there, how do we support the next generation in ways that are truly generative and not extractive? So
Mhm.
I think those questions, for me, connect to the future of Black studies, and I see that Black studies depends on how well we stay connected to community, to creativity, and to the evolving realities of Black life.
I absolutely love that. And generative and not extractive is care and ethics in a nutshell there. I love that. So thank you for that. That's a wonderful place to wrap up. And I was looking forward to this conversation, and I've really loved it, Tanisha. I really appreciate it. I think there's so much for everyone listening to think about, certainly for me to think about, and it's a reminder of what I said at the beginning of why it's important to have people who work on and in the arts on this podcast and talking about what the future of Black studies looks like. So thank you for everything, Tanisha. I really appreciate it.
Well, John, thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed talking to you, and if anything, if this sheds light on how artists run the world,
Yes,
then I've done my part.
you definitely have. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All
You
right,
too.
bye-bye.